I'd like to welcome everyone to our March 6, 2023 work session. We have a few items on the agenda, and I'll turn it over to the manager to introduce those items.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. This morning we have 3 presentations. I believe we get to start with NFC today. We've had Stephanie in the past, and this is an opportunity to get an update from her on all the great work that NFC is doing.
Great, thank you. Good morning. Thank you all for coming and getting up so early to be here. My name's Stephanie Murphy, and I'm the Executive Director of Neighborhood Finance Corporation, and I can't believe that next month will be my 9th year that I've been back at NFC, for about a total of 17 years total that I've been there. So a lot's going on, and a lot of it you know about, but I want to just sort of share with you. So today, I want to give you an update on our lending, what we did in 2022, our new Energy Advantage program that was recently funded by the City Council, so thank you. Our NFC Properties update, because that's a really busy line of business for us right now. And then some other things that we're working on in the community. Throughout this, please stop me. This should be a conversation, hopefully, and we can, because I really want to hear your feedback too on where you think we can be most useful as we're trying to be strategic about our growth. Just as a refresher, we were started in 1991 out of a 1989 plan, Stockard-Ninger plan, looking at how to revitalize neighborhoods, and that's been our mission since the beginning. We started out in 5 neighborhoods in Des Moines. We now lend in most of Des Moines, parts of Urbandale, West Des Moines, Talking to Clive, parts of Windsor Heights, and we have an office in Cedar Rapids. So a couple of just key points, just as refreshers. We lend in specific areas, but we don't have any income guidelines. So people of any income guidelines can take advantage of our program. Over time, we've added more benefits, I would say, bells and whistles, for people that are lower income, just understanding that it's harder for them to access financing and that they need additional subsidies often to purchase a home. Key to our success is your funding. I am lucky to serve on some national coalitions, and one thing that comes up constantly is how have you done the same thing consistently without having stops and starts for over 30 years? And it's because we get that money that serves as the forgivable loan money that leverages everything else that we do. It's just really key to our success. So thank you. That's it's been amazing. We only do loans that do a renovation component. So that's how we're not competing with lenders. Most lenders aren't going to want to do a loan that also includes, we're now up to about an average of $26,000 renovations per loan. So sort of we have our niche, right? And that's helped us. I talked about the $10,000 forgivable loan, and then how that also allows us to do our appraisals as off the improved value. And so with that subsidy, and then being able to do the appraisals off the improved value, that's allowed us to do lending that other folks can't do. And a lot of times the $10,000 is so important because a lot of the repairs are roofs, basement walls, things like that, that you don't necessarily get an increased value for. Our team, we have a great team. We're up to 25 team members. We've grown, we've about doubled in size in the past 9 years since I've been there. And the neighborhoods that we work with and the people that come to, that really have a commitment to the neighborhoods that they live in, making those improvements or moving into the neighborhoods if they're buying a house. Some of our other key partners besides the city that we work with in the county, one is NeighborWorks America. We became a NeighborWorks organization quite a few years ago, and that really is important as far as the funding, as well as providing us with some expertise and national information. We just last week were awarded our NeighborWorks Award for $426,000. So that's money that we use to pay our staff, as well as about half of it we use for our down payment assistance. So when we offer down payment assistance to our borrowers, that's money that we're getting through NeighborWorks. Also, we're able to sell loans to Fannie Mae, and so that provides us capital. And then the local financial institutions, please, they're on our website, thank them. We just were able to raise $21.75 million, which is, I think, our largest funding pool ever for our Phase 20 this year. And so those are the loans that we sell to the banks They're the loans that maybe don't fit the Fannie Mae secondary market box, and also all of our second mortgages. So that money will last us about 3 years, and we'll go out and do it again. I already mentioned the forgivable loan money, how important that is, the subsidy that we receive, and then again, the residents. We
Can I ask
couldn't do it.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Please do.
When you sell off to Fannie Mae and to the smaller banks, how soon do you sell off loans after they're like agreed to?
The Fannie Mae ones we sell pretty quickly, usually, not always. We try to commit them during the loan process, but the ones that we sell to the banks, we try to hold for probably anywhere from, up to 6 months. And that's because then we can earn the full interest off of them before we sell them to the banks.
And it's not like a refinancing situation, like the terms stay the same when you sell them off to Fannie Mae or to a bank?
Oh, right.
Okay.
Yeah, they buying the loan that we did, and we still service them. We think that's key to our success.
Oh, okay.
We don't actually service them, Iowa Bankers does, but to have a local servicing. So our delinquencies, I didn't put that in here, but they've remained below or at 2% ever since we sort of came out of the financial crisis, which is about half of what the national for a really good loan, and it's about a third of what FHA is. And it's because 99% of our home buyers receive home buyer education, and about 50% of the people that get a home improvement loan do. So like if people have like a blip on their credit, we compensate for that with home buyer education. Shout out to Home Inc. and Evelyn K. Davis, but primarily those for Home Inc., but we also do things with Evelyn K. Davis Center. And so those are the things that we think that we're doing. And then having those local servicer that, they call us on every loan before they would do foreclosure. We make sure that, and right now, we've had one foreclosure in the past 3 or 4 years, and that's because the person died and the house got burned and the family wasn't interested in dealing with it. So we're really proud of that. Does that answer all your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure. Any others? Please stop me. Our lending area in green, we just added part of Merle Hay neighborhood. You'll see where I put the arrow, and then a little bit of Sheridan Gardens that got left off. I have an email in my inbox from a neighbor requesting another neighborhood, so we may be back another part of the area. We have talked over time when I've come here about should we lend to just all of Des Moines, but have those higher income areas just be people below 80% median income. Always willing to consider that. The issue is that though last year we didn't use all the forgivable loan money because our lending was down due to interest rates being higher, most years we use all of our forgivable loan money. So we would just want to figure out how, if there was a lot of additional lending, how we would fund that. But always a conversation we're willing to have. This is what we did last year, just to sort of get to in Des Moines. So we did 143 households. Most people get more than one loan. About $8 million in lending, and then an additional 1.1 in forgivable loans. And in total renovations, we're almost 3.7 million. Sort of gives you where we are. And then just NeighborWorks is nice, and they always give us every year sort of what our economic impact is on the areas that we serve. And so NFC and NFC properties are responsible for 112 jobs being created or maintained in the community and $19.8 million, so almost $20 million of investment. Because we're paying lots of contractors, lots of small business people. That's who we work with. That's who's doing the work for our borrowers. And then those leverage are good too. Just, every dollar you're giving us, we're leveraging almost 7 other dollars. And we are seeing that value increase. We started tracking that a few years ago. So for every dollar of subsidy, we're almost getting $1.50 of increased value, which was sort of the idea, right, behind it all. Any questions on those before I'll move to the next one? Okay. So this is what we do by ward. We would always like to do more in Ward 4. I think part of the issue is that the area that we don't lend in Ward 4 is probably the most stable neighborhood, and a lot of the other areas are high rental. You know, I live right next door to Ward 4, and so it's that. So that's a challenge, and that's one thing we could overcome if we would go to do the whole city, but focus on people below 80. Is that. And then you'll see the big increase in Ward 1, and part of that is because we had like always gone in and out of Beaverdale, in and out of some neighborhoods, and we just added them on a permanent basis back in 2019. And so that's why you see that increase.
Do you have this breakdown by zip code?
We can get it by zip code.
Okay.
Yeah. Get that to you. We have a data person now. So that's the other thing I was going to say. If you're going to a neighborhood meeting, on our website under About Us is what we've done historically, since 1990 in each neighborhood. But if you want like what we've done in the past year or two or something like that to share, you're our best marketers. So when you go to neighborhood meetings, please remind people that we're out there. And I mean, we try to get to at least every neighborhood once a year, but the more people are reminded, and as you know, different people are there every time. But if you ever want any data, please just give me a day's notice. We'd be happy to pull that for you.
The Easter Lake neighborhood to Beaverdale? I mean, do you don't service the Easter Lake neighborhood because of the income? Is that what the deal is?
I think it's because when we started, it's the age of the housing stock that it was a newer housing stock.
Right. But not all of it is.
Not all of it, right? Yeah. So always, if there's areas that you think we should be in your neighborhood, please, in your ward, please point it out to us. Our one thing that we're always having to think about from federal funding is, because we are a CDFI, is that 60% of our lending has to be to lower moderate income people or lower moderate income census tracts. So if we get too much outside of low mod census tracts, we can get into trouble. But right now we're not in a problem, and they're actually changing all of that in the next couple of months. So we're sort of waiting and seeing what they're going to do.
If you specify the income level, would that make it better for you as far as what those rules are?
Right.
So you could specify anything under
80.
Okay.
And I've sort of thought about that, like with ION coming on, we're partnering with them on some things, like do we say, or if they're working with ION and they could need more money than ION can provide, do we provide it? So open to those discussions, and I can.
What's the dollar amount? I know for people watching at home, the 80%.
For a family, I wrote it down actually. Family of 4, it's 78.8. 70. And then it's on our website. If you look like under home improvement programs, there's a chart that shows what it is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would be interested to see the breakdown, not just by zip code, but also by that census tract, and like how much you're doing in low mod versus outside of low mod. And I guess I have maybe a hard question, I don't know, but like I'm just kind of wondering how this breakdown or how any of these other breakdowns kind of like speak to the mission of NFC. Like, is the mission more of keeping people in housing or getting people into housing in wealthier areas, or is it trying to get more people in housing in those areas that there's high rental, or how does that break down?
So when we first started, our mission was to improve neighborhoods, neighborhood revitalization fully. And so no income, there was really no different in how the program worked depending on your income. And over time, we've increased the subsidy for lower income folks. So I can tell you that 80% of our lending is to either low mod income person or low mod census tract.
80%?
80%. We track that on a monthly basis. So that's that. I would say over time, I mean, a lot is going on, and we can't just stay siloed in our mission, so a lot has changed. I would say it's almost harder. Like, there are more programs now, like with ION, and Polk County just increased their home repair program. I'm going to later on talk about a new program that we're doing with other. So there's more programs that people below 80 don't have to borrow money to get their house fixed, which is great, right? That's not, but so as a result, we may naturally start loaning to higher income people, but still be in low mod census tract. Does that make sense? Just because there's no need, we're not going to make someone borrow money if they could get the same thing done with ION or with Polk County or with Habitat and not have that loan. So that's one reality. The other thing, though, that we do is like the majority, we do down payment assistance now. All but one of our borrowers last year was eligible for down payment assistance that bought a home through us. So we're really finding that we are the difference for people getting into homes or not, which we didn't used to be. Like we used to be, it was more the home, that the home couldn't get financed because it had so many repairs, so people came to us. But now we're seeing both the home and borrowers needing the subsidy that we're providing. And we're able to do that because we're a CDFI and we're part of NeighborWorks, so we can access that capital. And that's really what's changed over time for us, because when we first started, we didn't have access to any of that other capital. We had the money from Fannie Mae and the money from the banks and the money from the city and county, and that was it. But we actually fund almost a third of the loans that we do with our own capital now.
So you're saying that it's shifted from just improving the housing stock to getting people in homes.
Right.
Okay.
And getting into people into home. I mean, my passion is, and I get passionate sometimes when I'm up here, but my passion is getting people into home that then they can afford long term. Right. I worked on the foreclosure crisis. I don't want to see that again. And if people buy a house and somebody says, well, you can go do the roof in 2 years when it needs to be done. Well, if you're a low-income person, you're not going to have $15,000 saved to put a new roof on in 2 years. And you're not going to have the equity to do it. So if they can come to us and get the roof, our loan, you earn equity much quicker. I think that's another reason we don't see foreclosures. So it's a combination.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Great. Thanks for asking, because I could talk about this all day, as probably some of you know, so I'll move on. Now, while I'm really here, and huge thanks to Malcolm, and I forgot to say thank you to Linda and Chris that serve on our board as well, but Malcolm really got this to the end as the Energy Advantage program. And Josh helped actually on the committee where we sort of designed it and set it up before we even knew there was money for it, when we were just like, what would we do? We do a lot of those discussions at NFC, and that's sort of why I'm asking for your input. What would we do if we had money? And one thing we said is we saw that our homeowners and home buyers had a desire to do energy improvements, but they couldn't afford to do those additional things if it was part of a repayable loan. So thank you for the $1.5 million. We got a total of $2 million from local governments to do this throughout our lending area. We're still waiting on West Des Moines, but what's going to happen is it's tied to an NFC loan. It's $10,000 additional money. It's a deferred loan, so we'll recycle it, and we'll go out and apply for more money to once we get it started to do that. And we're hoping through the Inflation Reduction Act there'll be money available. And we'll do an energy audit, figure out, and we're working with the energy group. I don't know if anyone knows them, a local business. They're going to do the energy audit, figure out what things will bring the most, save that household the most money, what improvements that can be made. And those will be the things that will be prioritized with the $10,000. People can do additional stuff and borrow that into their loan and use the forgivable loan. But the $10,000 will say, first you have to do the priority. So if insulation's the first thing, then that's what we'll do. Now, the really exciting thing is Mid-American came in and said that they will pay for the energy audit and they'll do the weatherization and insulation for all of our borrowers below 80% median income. So that will not be added on to those. So all those folks will be able to do just additional things. So we're really excited about that. And then when it's all done, we'll do another audit, blower door test, the energy group, well, I use the we loosely, and figure out what kind of money. And then we're also going to track the savings that they experienced in that year. So we're really excited. Any questions about that?
money yet? Have you received your upper dollars?
We haven't received the money, but that's okay. We haven't closed any
I
loans,
think
so we'll
I
get
sent
money.
a couple of emails about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, we haven't gotten the actual check, but that's okay. We have taken applications.
That's what I was going to wonder.
What?
If you've taken applications and if you've had a good response to it.
Yeah, we haven't done much publicity,
Okay.
but I went out to a couple neighborhood meetings and people were super fired up. So that made me feel like that we hit the right spot. Because really what I've learned, and you probably have a lot more experience, is that people have a desire to do it, but they don't feel like they can increase their mortgage payment without having that energy savings first. So super excited. Thank you all for all the work that took to get that across the finish line. And we hope that that's an ongoing program. And there is a flyer on our website. So if you're going to a neighborhood meeting or if you want me to drop some off or anything, we have them at the office. We can get them to you. NFC Properties, you've been to some of our open houses this year. We did 3 properties with InvestDSM. They've all sold and closed, I believe. So yay for that. We are doing 4 additional homes with them this year. I have the addresses on there. And then thank you tonight on council is the next 4 properties, but I really appreciate that the city invested in getting staff to make the process work for the tax sale properties. These are some properties we've worked on for a while, and we're really excited to have them. It improves neighborhoods to get new homes on lots. A couple of the lots that we got through the city tax sale process are in the InvestDSM area, so we'll probably partner with them. So we'll probably end up doing 6 houses this year with them. Some of them might get done next year just for budgeting and all of that. But yeah, we're really excited. Any questions about that? We did have a couple of slow years just because of the pandemic and sort of adjusting our plans with the new building codes and all that. Okay, I'm going to hit a couple of things. So tomorrow at the Polk County Supervisors meeting, 2 programs are going to get voted on. As far as I know, they're on the agenda. One is a Polk County down payment program. So if you know anyone that's below 80% median income that's thinking about buying a house in Polk County, let's say the city of Des Moines, now is the time. $30,000 in down payment assistance will be available for people below 80%. It will be a deferred loan, so they'll have to pay it back at some point, and we'll do some strong communication around that. And it will not be just through neighborhood finance. It will be through other lenders as well. We haven't identified those yet. The other program that I don't even think I put on here is that we've been working on, and this I'll give a lot of credit to Lance Henning at Habitat for Humanity. He and I worked on this along with all of the other partners, Rebuilding Together, Polk County, ION, to figure out those people that come to one of our organizations, and even when we all try to put in the money we have, we're still $30,000 short. It used to be 25, now it's 30, it seems, short. And we're finding that those people have no other housing option if we don't get their house fixed. Usually it's been in the house, their family for a long time. They don't have a mortgage. And for whatever reason, it's just fallen into disrepair. So we're going to have that 30,000 gap now that we will work together with all the organizations. We're all going to have weekly calls and make that happen. So we're super excited. So if you're out there and you're talking to constituents that just have maybe gone to one of us before and couldn't get help because we couldn't pull enough money together, send them back, because hopefully in the next month or so we'll have that all set up. And NFC, I don't think we'll do that many of them because most of our borrowers don't fit into that, but we'll do some. But we are going to be closing the deferred loan for it. I already mentioned that we raised the $21.75 million. That was a big, exciting moment for us. Hopefully you all know that we launched Journey to Homeownership a year ago. It's a down payment program specific for African Americans, sort of looking at what the One Economy report was calling us out to do in the housing space. And it's combined with, well, we hired a loan originator that's specifically working on it. And we're also we do classes. So they're not homebuyer education. They're more like, what does homeownership look for me and my family? We have one great story of a father and son. No one in their family had ever owned a home. They bought a house on the same street. using our program. They just didn't even have this dream, and they were able to make it happen working with Evelyn K. Davis. So we've really seen some transformational things happen and looking forward to more. We do hope to expand that to other minorities. We have a grant that we should hear about in the next few weeks, and if we get that, we'll be expanding it. On a personal note, and I'm so thankful to the board for supporting it, I am in Achieving Excellence. It's a 20-month leadership challenge. I just got back from Harvard last week, so my brain is full with ideas. And one of those is the challenge that I'm going to be working on, and I really am looking for your input, is what projects aren't getting done because there's not enough capital. What affordable housing? We have some loans on some of the tax credit projects that were done during the financial crisis. What community things aren't getting funded? And if we could raise the capital as a CDFI, what's possible? So I'm interested in hearing. I'm going to be out interviewing people, and if you want to be one of those folks, let me know to get those ideas and see if that's a space that we need to move into to move the needle for our community. And then we're moving. I think everybody may know that, but we bought a property at 4908 Franklin. We'll be moving in May. And we've sold our building, and another nonprofit's moving into it. And we outgrew our space. And so I guess that's a good thing, and we're excited to be moving. And that's all I have. What questions do you have for me?
Does anyone have any other questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. And taking my city council hat off, my real estate hat, I've spent 22 years working with NFC because my business was built basically in Wards 2 and Ward 4. I mean, that's where I did 95% of all of my business throughout the years. So I've worked with NFC for many, many years. And Stephanie, we are so lucky to have you as the executive director because you're so good at what you do, and your staff is just amazing. So thank you, and just continue to do what you're doing, but you've done a great job.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'll take that back. We do have a
Okay.
great team.
I just would like to, on behalf of the city, thank you and your team for what you're doing for our city to improve lives. So with that.
Just,
Carl has
it's great to see your staff at tabling at various events, and there's always activity around your table too, so
Good, yeah.
that's great.
Yeah, we're really fortunate to have good support from the neighborhoods, and we love that part. It's a long couple of years for all of us to not be able to do that. So thank you. Do you want me to do anything with this or just leave it? Thank you very much for everything, and I'll see you back tonight.
Okay. Next, if you want to introduce this next item.
You bet. Okay, the next two items are an opportunity to look at possible new policies for the city. The donation bins is a topic that we'll start with, and then we'll hit on the hazardous tree topic. So I think, Eric, you get to start us off on the
Yes, sir.
donation bins.
Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the City Council. Eric Lundy, City of Des Moines Zoning Enforcement Officer. Start out with, this is something we've been probably dealing with on the enforcement end for about, since early summer. We started seeing bins pop up, so I'll get into that a little more in depth. So this year we've seen these placed around the city in every ward. We've seen them at schools, churches, and business locations. They just started popping up. The ones that we're dealing with right at the moment, their focus is to divert fabric and textile waste out of the waste stream. They are able to treat that as a commodity that is a recycled material that gets reused. The current vendor that we've been encountering is Green Bins of Iowa, but they have the doing business as on their boxes, the closed bin, and they're bright green if you haven't seen them around the city. This company provides compensation to the owners in the form of cash or monetary compensation. Certainly commercial business owners are just seeing that as a revenue source. I believe the schools that are involved have used it for passing on to their parent-teacher organizations for as a funding source. So that's been kind of the conflict, I think, here is that some of the schools are actually a beneficiary of what's going on. So they've been taking advantage of it. Currently, the way these bins are treated, from a zoning perspective, they're being looked at as an accessory component to wherever they're located. They're not the primary use of the property. They're just treated as an accessory component. Their activity is subordinate to the overall activity going on the property. So we do treat that as an accessory component. The physical placement, however, is looked at differently. This is a recycled material, just like your recycling bins and your solid waste dumpsters. So right now, the ordinance treats these just like we would one of those, and it should be in an enclosure. It should be out of the front setback, generally in the rear setback, but sometimes, depending on the situation, it could be in the side setback. We would allow them inside, so if they wanted to keep these inside a building, we wouldn't look at them at all. The opaque enclosure could be a masonry enclosure per our code, or there's an alternate design that they would have the option to look at. I did take a look around. I didn't get a great response from other metro cities, but I did get a few. I also got Marion, but I didn't include that on here. Pleasant Hill has no accommodation for these whatsoever. They just tell them they have to take them away. Urbandale looks at them more as an accessory structure, which has certain requirements. They do not allow them in front yards, and they aren't allowed to take away the required parking. And so that's primarily the issue there from their perspective. The West Des Moines, they treat them pretty much the same way as we do under their code. So they treat them like they're a solid waste refuse container and treat them as such. We've been, like I said, we've been probably dealing with them maybe up to 8 months now, but for the most part, 6 months, since midsummer, basically. We've had 4 locations at the schools. I think they might be in other locations that we haven't enforced on and haven't gotten complaints or seen these things, but they may be on other schools. There is one that we've enforced on at a church, and then 6 that were on commercial properties. We've got, at the time when I put this together, there was 4 of them that were in compliance on commercial properties where they had been removed. Now, commercial properties are used to having to deal with enforcement sometimes, so I think they respond a lot quicker than a church or a school might in terms of getting a notice of violation. I'm going to go through a few locations just to see how they're being placed. This one's at the Windsor Elementary School on University Avenue. This is actually on the side street, not on University, where there's a bus drop. It's right up against the right-of-way. I believe it's still on their property. This is on Southwest 9th at a gas station at Virginia and Southwest 9th. As you can see, it's in the area that's between the curb and the sidewalk where we normally want to treat that as a landscape perimeter. And you can also see that it's also attracting a little bit of
That's gone, though.
junk. Yeah, I think the whole container's
That's
been
gone.
removed in this case, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of these are pictures from, you can see the date on the pictures. Some of those were quite a while ago. This one's up at 3513 Amherst at St. John's. Again, in that perimeter from the parking lot, between the sidewalk and the parking lot. And then this is down on McCombs Middle School at 201 County Line Road. I think that's probably about 20 to 25 feet back from the front property line. That sign there is right on the property line. And then this is probably the one that's the most problematic in my opinion. This is at Edmonds. It's actually hanging into the right-of-way over the bus lane, but it's also the public sidewalk through there along Center Street, or Crocker, I'm sorry, as it kind of bends around from 15th. Edmonds also has another one in their front side along 15th. So they actually have two places around their site. So the compliance strategies currently that have been presented to the violators have been, first option is just to remove them and take away the issue. The other option that's been provided to them, and this has been through discussions with the operator, I think Brad Burnett and Mark Olson are the two individuals that represent that company, and we've had conversations that they're aware of the process they could follow in order to get design alternative relief through Chapter 135. And then the other one I think that they're sort of waiting on at this point is whether the city council would want to accommodate them through an enabling process of allowing them through the code or through a change to the code.
And Eric, this is for-profit company.
So yeah,
He
they don't necessarily have to be for profit. The one we happen to be dealing with is a
Yes.
company that does look at them to make money. Now
Right.
I think they're partnering with nonprofit or charitable organizations or schools or churches
that's not
to
how
do this.
that's
But
not how he explained it to me.
well, I mean, I'm just saying that
That's how he explained it
that's
to
where
me.
they're putting them in some of the
Okay.
some of the money that they pay the owners goes to those type of entities like the school or the PTA or whatever. But
Yeah, they give a portion of it.
yeah,
to
they're giving a
wherever it's
portion
at.
of it. Yeah, but they're there to make money, no doubt about it.
Okay.
But I should point out that they wouldn't necessarily, if this was something that the city allowed, we would treat them, the same as a nonprofit if they were strictly doing it for donation.
Can we clarify, how is the business model, as far as you know, different than other recycling business models? Because other recycling also sells commodity, like the recycling that we do as the city
Yeah,
sells
so,
recycling off as
so
commodity.
I mean, I don't know if we really have it. I mean, right now, if you wanted to do something like this, you would take it somewhere and have it,
Or I mean, you put it out on your
Your curb.
curb.
Yeah, like.
In a recycling.
Yeah, right now, the city's recycling program does not accept textiles.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that the city's recycling program is we put our recyclables out on the curb and they get picked up and then they get sold for commodity in the same way. Is that correct?
Yeah, very similar, yes.
Okay.
I don't know the nuances of the clothespins, who they're sending their material to or where it's getting handled. I didn't look into it that deep, but they're sending it to, they're collecting it and they're getting paid like 20 cents on the pound, for example.
I just didn't know if there was a significant difference between how recycling works in general.
Well, I want to make sure that you understand that, like the bins, personal bins that go out, that's a temporary allowance.
Yes, no, I understand the difference between the permanent.
Residential.
Yes, I just meant that selling as a commodity is what we do is recycling in general.
Yeah. Now, there's certainly examples around the country of bins that collect and use it as material, or the items are sold, resold for resale or consignment. So that's another example of how these are used. In terms of amending the regulations, done some looking around the country as to where these are allowed and regulated. There, you can see the list of jurisdictions. It's pretty much spread all over the country. Most of them treat them as business licenses. So rather than a kind of a zoning use, they're looked at as a business use. I would say probably the closest thing we would have would be our transient merchant licensing here. A little bit different in that these are looked to be permanently placed on the site, whereas our transient merchants move every day. But they would be similarly reviewed and regulated, I think, if we were to go through that process. You can look at the list there. Places they issue them through either their city clerk or with an administrative review process. They limit things such as size, number, location placement. They put limitations on the signage that are on them, and will require certain information to be put on them for the benefit of the public in case there's problems. They prohibit hazardous material, other items that don't fit into the containers to avoid the accumulation of junk and debris and other items. They require maintenance on these so that they are kept painted nicely or they don't rust in place basically and start becoming another problem. They provide examples. There's certain communities that require them to sign off and say the city can step in and do mitigation and enforcement. At the worst case, come in and remove it, like a cleanup, like we have for our junk and debris. And then a lot of them also require proof of bonding and liability. I don't know if that completely indemnifies the city, but I think it's an attempt to at least reduce the city's risk.
Before we move on, the first bullet point under the standards, the permitting with city clerk, would that be a separate permit for each bin, or does that kind of go with the next one, the limited size number? That like it would be a permit for the one business and then.
Well, I think that the review has to review them at each location because every location is going to be unique. So I would normally, like the transient merchant premise permit is by the location.
Okay.
And so it would be a separate fee for each location.
Have they moved the one off the right of way yet? Is it still on the sidewalk?
I don't know. Right now our enforcement's on hold, so.
But that would be something we could regulate.
Yeah, and they know that they're aware that that's an issue and that that's not allowed.
But they haven't moved it yet.
He doesn't
still
know.
Yeah, I don't think that they have, but.
Yeah, that's.
And I just wanted to, my understanding, we have a conversation with with Brad Burnett, was that there is communication on the bin, like there's a phone number on the bin that goes like directly to him that would for cleanup, that they get cleanup within 24 hours, that they have like things on the bins that tell them when they're full so they shouldn't overflow, things like that. So like all of these standards that are listed here should line up with how they're doing business, and if it isn't lining up with how they're saying they're doing business, then we would be able, it would be the standards that they're supposedly already held to.
Yes, I think some of the things that might not line up with them is where they're placed on the site, because I think they depend on the visibility quite a bit to being close to the street, and I wouldn't recommend, and I would think that most communities that regulate these don't allow them to be right up in the front of the property.
Can you clarify that a little bit more, because I don't see that on here? Or I guess
When I say,
location placement.
yeah, placement, safe location placement, yeah.
Because
They're
it
all
wouldn't be
right.
the same, sorry, it wouldn't be the same as what we're saying right now, whereas they need to be inside or inside of an enclosure or on the side or the back.
That would be something that you're considering
That's
today,
right.
For the direction that you would give is this something we want to accommodate and treat differently? Again, and before we're done here, I kind of speak to the staff's view of this at this point.
You talk about the safety component, because that's something I'm curious about.
Safety, like not in the drive aisles or in walkways.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else, Carl?
Yes, so Eric, so we don't have business licenses in general, right? The city does not.
Not really. I mean,
Yeah.
our system calls them business licenses, but we have, like I said, the closest thing that would probably align with this would be the transient merchant premise.
Yeah, so
permit,
at
so.
another time, it might be interesting just to talk about if that's an area that we should have. I know it came up, Scott, what was
Court Avenue.
Court Avenue, yeah. Just
That was, I think,
For
one of the
the-
suggestions
there-
from the.
there must be a reason historically that we haven't done this, but it might be time to revisit that just in broad strokes, if that'd be a good thing to.
We can have a separate conversation on that.
I have one comment.
Yes, Linda?
My comment is I just hope that everybody's aware that when you, this is considered waste, but when you take those same items to many of our nonprofits like JAPA, Salvation Army, they also bundle those regs up and sell them. So that money is going directly back to a nonprofit and not to a middleman who is there to make profit. So you can accomplish the same thing to keep them out of the landfill by donating them to one of our nonprofits who bundles and sells those regs.
That's correct. And my understanding is that like the Goodwills and Salvation Armies and
Yeah.
DAVs, anything they can't put out on the shelf for sale.
But
They
it
have another
stays
way,
with
they
the
have another way to
company
make
then.
revenue from it, yes.
Yeah, Joppa, I know Joppa does that, and they just resell it, so we know that it's going directly back to the nonprofits.
So getting into some other considerations that the city council may want to take into account here. History on the legal side of things, there's been legal challenges. That's resulted in regulation. You know, a lot of places tried to discern between nonprofit and for-profit. That really didn't pass with the courts. The courts really treat this as a form of protected speech, soliciting of charitable donations. So they didn't believe that we could really distinguish between nonprofit or for-profit as a regulating entity. They are seeking, well, it could be seeking charitable. This particular one may not be directly, no, but they could. We really can't divide it up that way. Let's put it that way.
Right, but that.
Yeah,
that
there may be
precedent-
people that want to
precedent
seek
isn't-
donations for charitable
That
purposes.
precedent isn't an issue here.
Yeah, I don't want to argue that one way or the other. Just something that the council might consider, because if you're opening this up, this could involve other entities that do want to seek charitable donations. It's also legally vulnerable to single out or allow it only for schools or churches. Historically, this came up probably close to 20 years ago now with our Plan and Zoning Commission. When at that time, we were looking at a zoning update, and we were going through this process as well of considering how we want to treat donation bins, which were a little bit problematic at that time. And, that's where we landed where we are today, basically, because of some of the problems that we were experiencing with dumping or neglect of their condition by either the property owner or the operators. Another issue is that donors might misinterpret, the way that these are handled. Again, that came up. This one we're dealing with is a for-profit. The donated items are not being put out for resale. Rather, the owners are getting a cash payment or a monetary payment for the volume of their what they take in on that particular location. The incentives might drive property owners to solicit other material from other locations to bring to this site. So not only would they be collecting voluntarily to that location, but they might be bringing other material from other places to get the credit, so to speak.
Can you clarify that? Sorry.
So one of the principals I spoke with hinted at some of the parents are very gung-ho, and they would go out and go to these places, maybe like Joppa or some of the other people that get donations, and take things off their hands they didn't want to deal with just to get the volume, because the monetary compensation they get is based on the volume that they collect. So, the schools and churches specifically are in most part generally in proximity to residential neighborhoods. So some of the impacts that these might be generating are right at locations that are in residential neighborhoods. And then one of the things, if we did start permitting, that's going to drive up some of the staff time to process, and certainly with them, we also then need to enforce on people that aren't following the process and getting permits. So that's going to generate a little additional staff time. Then the last thing here is kind of something to take into consideration. If we want to really make this a high bar, one of the ways we could handle this is through the zoning side and make this a conditional use in certain locations, if we want to narrow it down. But that process is going to be a little bit more onerous because it requires them to go in front of Plan and Zoning, Board of Adjustment to get approval, potentially Plan and Zoning if they also have to rezone the property, which has a fee to it. So some of these school organizations may not be getting that much money that it's worth it. So something else to consider. here, these are kind of the three overall options to really think about here. We could continue to proceed under the current ordinances and processes, which allows them also to seek design alternatives in whatever location if they're not meeting the standards in Chapter 135. They can amend the code to allow a business license or permitting through the development regulations. And that we've talked about that and what those standards might be, or I think we would have to get more into depth in reviewing what we actually want to approve and what we would want to enforce through that process. And then the other one is the higher bar. Consider this as a either administrative or formal hearing process for approval. So yes.
The last point there, is that where you're considering the Board of, so we already kind of have a process in place. If somebody wants to place something like this, where you would go to the Board of Adjustment or no?
Yeah, this would be a kind of a different branch of that if you wanted to go that route and specifically enable them as a conditional use, then it would go to Board of Adjustment. Right now, they look at the plan and zoning, if they were seeking design alternative, would look at this as like another dumpster, and would treat it as such. So
Where it would have to be covered, which
it'd have to be in an enclosure and out of the setbacks. Yeah. So,
yeah, the visibility
correct.
of these things at schools or churches.
So I'm going to ask if there's any questions, and then I'll ask I think for the input of the council. Again, if you're just looking at it from a pure enforcement perspective, it's very challenging at the moment, given the resources that we have. So I would say that right now our preference is to kind of manage it the way we currently manage it, but certainly there's other factors that might play into what the council's wishes.
But you have to enforce now.
Correct.
I mean,
Yes.
Enforcement's an issue either way.
Yes. And without standards, however, they're just being arbitrarily placed, yeah. And maybe they would learn over time, certain operators. I can tell you that right now, we only have the one, but certainly with one comes others over time. So,
So it would be easier, sorry.
That's,
go ahead.
It would be easier to enforce with standards in place. Therefore, the operator would learn the standards, just abide by the standards generally. And then enforcement would be if they broke those standards.
So enforcement would be more, we would be able to point towards certain standards, yes. And then the other thing is it's more predictable on the operator's part, or the owner's part.
If this were treated just like another refuse container, if I have a business and I build an enclosure and I just put it in there just like a dumpster, is that okay?
It is, yeah.
It is,
Yep.
okay.
So if schools wanted to have an area in the back and they had it enclosed and,
Just
the
treat it like
students
a
and
dumpster.
teachers and parents wanted to come and drop their stuff there, they could do that, yeah.
And what kind of signage could that allow on the?
I think if it was not visible from the street and it was just there on, for the benefit of people that know where the container sits, that would not be a problem, especially if it's in the enclosure, so.
I'm trying to get clarity on this seeking charitable donations difference, because I guess we said that there's legal challenges trying to discern between nonprofit and for-profit, but only seeking charitable donations is seen as the court as protected speech. So if it's not seeking charitable donations, are we able to regulate saying seeking charitable donations is fine, however, if you're not seeking charitable donations, then it's not?
I think the point of that was really just to caution the council that in the past, in other jurisdictions that have decided they wanted to delineate between nonprofit and for-profit entities, allowing one or the other, that has been legally problematic. I think that the message to take from that is we need to treat these the same, whether they're from a for-profit situation or a nonprofit
But
situation.
we could classify the use, right? So we could carve out and deal with simply textile recycling bin, like a very specific narrow use, right? So
Yes.
wouldn't,
Yes.
so we could narrowly tailor this so that we weren't going to just see random bins. This would be
You could, and that would be the change or amending the regulations, whether that be through a business license or permit, like a site permit, or through the the bigger bar, which would be a zoning type process.
And I guess my take, particularly, I see multiple benefits to allowing textile-specific bins. I mean, I think it diverts from the waste stream. I don't think we have good recycling options. Yes, there are some recycling options, but I think this provides an option that doesn't exist. It diverts from the waste stream, and if we can narrowly tailor it in a way that is enforceable, I'd like to see us provide some guidance along those.
And if we do get into that, I think we would definitely want to involve legal to say, we didn't do a huge amount of legal research, but if we're going to go a certain direction, I think we do want to make sure that we're legally in good standing as well through that process.
Obviously, I seen the one on Southwest 9th quite a bit, and that wasn't the only picture that had garbage and stuff next to the side of it, and it sat on the landscaping portion of it is where they sat it at. So, I mean, that can't be allowed. I mean, I'm glad that they've removed most of them, other than the schools. You know, I guess I'd like to take a look at maybe either a Board of Adjustment type deal or something to, and I don't even know if we can limit it to schools and in the churches or something like that. But if we're going to put them everywhere, yeah, I'm not going to be in favor of that. That doesn't look like something I want to be proud of in our city, because I know what's going to happen because I've watched it happen already, and we have a picture of it. So
Yeah, and that was, to be honest with you,
That was
the
random.
time I've been in the city, nearly 30 years, that has been the issue, is
Yeah.
the neglect and the lack of maintenance.
And I know he said he'll be out within 24 hours, but the 24 hours and the majority of these are sitting right in the neighborhood, and the neighbors are looking at it.
And this is one entity that's maybe more responsible.
Right. We're going to open up the
Yeah,
door
if we
for
open
life.
it up, it could, we get the spectrum like we do with everything else that we regulate, so.
I think that I would like to see regulation specifying, because like, I agree, like, we don't want one where we had that picture of it just being the landscaping, but regulating like where they can be, how many can be in a certain location, things like that, but like regulating so we have these standards that we're able to hold them to, that we have like a blueprint of like, these are the standards we're going to hold you to. I think that, if we have a responsible operator now, it shouldn't be a problem. And if we have operators in the future, then we are able to hold them to the standard that we're holding everybody else to. So I would be in favor of getting specific regulation on how these can be used and going to legal and figuring out how specific we can be about that.
Seems like we have
My,
varying opinions on this, so.
well, my thought is I'm not going to be supportive of an ordinance if it wants to be treated just like a refuge container. You put it back in closure, and you handle it just like you do your dumpster at the stores. But I would not be supportive of anything else. People get confused. They think that it's a recycling bin. They think they can put their things in there, and it goes to a good cause. It's a for-profit company. Just go donate to your local charity. And DAV will come and pick it up from your driveway. You don't even have to take it anymore. So I'm not going to be supportive of anything. I don't think they look good. They're nice and shiny and new right now, but what are they going to look like 5 years from now? And I pass one regularly in my neighborhood, and it needs to be gone. It's just like having a dumpster out on the front yard.
Carl?
That's my vote.
I guess a deeper dive from your staff on this. I think that the recycling is good, and I have places in downtown where I can take clothing to be donated, but I don't know that everyone wants to take almost rag clothing to the DAV. So I'm not, I haven't put a lot of thought into this previously. So if you want to come forward with some more specific proposals, that'd be fine with me. So.
I would say the cause is good. I understand the recycling. The problematic portion of it is what you see, like with the extra garbage set beside. I know the one right by me also has that. You have a school ground that will probably clean it up. But I think we have to look at the unintended consequence. What is going to happen down the road? This could be a great operator, and then what goes forward. So whatever we put together, I would welcome looking at it closer. But I think we have to be very careful going forward on how we're going to implement it in a fair way that's not out on sidewalks in the front. If you can move it to the back, people can still get to the back of a school too. But if it's just on every random business, I think we could have problems. So unfortunately, some things that are good ideas become magnified problems for us down the road. And I just want to avoid any of that. Again, great cause, getting recycling clothes. But can we do it in a way that doesn't put a lot of containers out in front of every place and possible trash? With that, is that clear, everyone?
So moving forward, I think maybe staff can take a look further in depth here and come up with some standards that maybe that would be looked at then. I guess I'm curious if there's really the desire to make it a more formal kind of review at a Board of Adjustment level.
Based on its use.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, based on a use versus.
I would say no to going through Board of Adjustment. I think that we should just have a standard and that be the standard that we use and have the permitting process and be able to enforce based on that standard. That's what I was talking about, at least.
Like the transient.
Yes.
I mean, it obviously has to go through some type of site plan. I mean,
Yeah, so
you can't just pop these up.
Yeah, so a
That's
transient
what's
merchant,
happening.
for example, has a required site plan and they're limited to a location on the site and they're enforced to that. Of course, that is a challenge because, these things move around every day, so we have to stay on top of them.
We still have issues with that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a different.
So, I mean, that gives you a flavor for the challenge of something we do allow and our
Yeah.
ability to enforce it when we have the spectrum of different operators, good operators versus not so good operators.
Right.
And if I could just add one comment, this is costing taxpayer dollars. These are city staff that's having to spend time dealing with this. And there's a cost to that. Why even deal with it?
I think unless we're going to say absolutely no clothing recycling bins, there's going to be staff time that's going to be dedicated to it. Because if this is going to exist in our city, then staff time is going to be dedicated to it. And if we have a standard, it's a little bit easier for staff to deal with it, it seems to me, than if we don't.
If you just deal with
Well,
I think
we've.
I
any of
think
us
that
have
we
said
need
we're
to
all
have-
in to have these
Well,
things in.
no, I think we need to have, we'll leave it up to you and your staff to come back with maybe more information as far as what could be an alternative to make sure we have some controls on this and that we still provide a service of recycling, or if what other recycling is available. To your point, if there's other people that are doing it, then how much are they doing? And what can they expand what they're doing so that we don't have bins in every building in the front?
It's fair to say that in either a ZBOA process or a new permit, the site is going to be reviewed.
Correct.
And the requirements for screening and sheltering, whatever, would apply in both cases. So if you haven't already spoken to whether you would prefer a permit style or a ZBOA process, I would ask you to reach out to me and let me know that, because I've got some notes on that. But
Okay.
I'm going to need to know further from those that haven't spoken.
We are talking about screening them, right?
Either way, it's just whether it's a business, through a business permit that gets reviewed, or a ZBOA, they're going to have site requirements.
Yes.
Side, street.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, with that, have we got clear direction?
Enough that I'll
Enough.
reach out to those, and I'll check with the mayor as well.
Okay,
Thanks for
Thank
your
you.
time this morning.
So we have a last topic here for this morning, concern that a couple different council members have brought to us about hazardous trees, particularly on private property, because we have a pretty good process when we have trees that are overhanging public sidewalks and right-of-way to get those addressed quickly through Public Works and Forestry. But now we have a higher concern, the ash borer trees and others on private property that put at risk other private property. And so we wanted to introduce this topic, get some input, and see what our next steps might need to be, which may include more research. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, members of the City Council, Chris Johansson, Neighborhood Services Director. As Scott alluded to, here to talk about amending the city code to allow city to take enforcement action on hazardous trees on private property. One thing to be clear, the specific request that we did get from City Council was to limit it to rental property. But as part of our review, we did want to look at it for all private property. So staff did meet with staff from Public Works, Forestry Division, Legal Department, did visit with the City Manager's office, and coming up with this discussion today. We're going to look at some considerations for council to weigh in reviewing our next steps on this. Staff did look at surrounding ordinances of other cities, and we do have some sample ordinance language to go over as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Dalton to kind of go over his review.
Good morning, Dalton Jacobus, NID Administrator. I'll go through kind of like the program and what it could look like. If you have any questions about the trees specifically, we've got Shane here from Forestry. And if you've got questions about kind of the legal implications and saving us from ourselves, Gary's here from the legal team. So the request came from Linda for private hazardous tree enforcement. Des Moines does not currently have that in our ordinance in Chapter 42, which is where we handle most of our like junk and debris and health and sanitation stuff. The original request was to handle it on private property for rentals, and I'll kind of get into how we approach that. So here, the things that you need to consider in an amendment to the ordinance to take enforcement action on hazardous trees on private property would be certifying that the tree is a hazard. And my team, you would probably want to have that done by an arborist or a tree professional. My team is not currently able to do that, which is why we asked Forestry's input on this. Bunch of different rabbit holes we can go down on any of these. So right now we're keeping it high level. And when we get a little more guidance from you, we can kind of drill down into that for our next discussion. Consideration you might want to think about as we talk about this is the potential for damage during abatement by either city crews or a contractor if we do proceed with this program. Currently, when we do our cleanups, if there's a claim like a truck backs into somebody's garage or something, every claim's a big deal. That's not good. But we're talking about risk for catastrophic damage. So dropping a tree on somebody's house, a cable snapping on a crane. So there's always risk. So just be mindful of that. Most of the health and sanitation stuff that my team deals with is the result of people piling garbage in their yards or junked out vehicles. So the homeowner reasonably caused that nuisance, and so the homeowner can, for the most part, most of the time, reasonably abate that nuisance on their own. Sometimes with pretty minimal investment. A tree, it's not like they planted this tree 100 years ago and it's now dead. So there's a very high cost of abatement that they realistically cannot do on their own. So there's a pretty high financial impact to the property owners. And we've got kind of a question about that later on. But as with all of our health and sanitation stuff, this kind of puts us, we enforce on the letter of the code, but it does kind of put us in the middle of civil disputes. A few of them would be back 100 years ago. They didn't necessarily have like fences and property lines and The documentation just wasn't as good on it, so people would plant trees on their property corners in the rear yards. And so when we have a nuisance tree, it's going to be identifying whose tree is that specifically, or what portion of that tree belongs to each person. And that is a pretty tenuous situation for the city to be in. It's not unmanageable, but we typically try to stay out of civil disputes.
Along those lines, I mean, if there's a dead tree in someone's yard, I mean, the tree canopy is large. A dead tree can have limbs hanging over into someone else's yard. Frequently, I mean, that's what causes some of this concern, right?
Right.
How is that? It's just silent on who's responsible. I mean, I assume if the tree is physically located, the stump, stump of the tree is in the yard and the canopy hangs over, we know the homeowner, right?
Right. So, and this is why we got Gary involved with that legal team. So I'll give it a stab, and if I'm butchering this, I'm going to defer to Gary. But Iowa's a Massachusetts tree law state, and so if the part of the tree is hanging over the property, whatever is over your property, you're well within your rights to trim up. Make for a good neighbor that does not, because you'll have somebody go on vacation. The angry neighbor will go out there and lop it straight up from the property line. They're within their rights to do that. But then it kind of gets into the civil dispute thing. As far as like the trunk itself being 100% on somebody's property, but the limbs being on somebody else's property, the non-trunk owner is well within their rights to trim that straight up from the property line. But a lot of the risk lies with the actual main structure of the tree falling, and they can't debate that without going onto their properties. Does that make sense?
So when the tree falls on, my neighbor's tree falls on my fence, and it's hanging over, I'm responsible for fixing my fence. My neighbor's not responsible, correct?
As I understand it. Gary, am I butchering that?
I mean, that's what I've heard in the past.
Yep. I'm going to defer to Gary on this.
Okay.
Good morning, Gary Guidelock, Assistant City Attorney. There's actually a lot more subtlety in this than probably we can address this morning. So really, just this bit of the discussion has brought up the right to do something about overhanging limbs versus the responsibility to take care of them. And I think that's an important distinction, because part of the discussion where we're talking about the scenario that you just gave, Mr. Gatto, if your neighbor's tree limbs are overhanging your property, you may have the right to clear those at the property line, but not necessarily the responsibility to do something about those. With this ordinance or potential ordinance, we're really focusing more on the responsibility piece of it. Who would be responsible for mitigating hazardous tree issues? One other aspect of that we haven't necessarily looked at, sometimes when we're dealing with these issues, in order to determine ownership, you don't necessarily focus only on the trunk, but also like the root structure, like if the majority of the root structure is located on the property line. So there are a lot of complications and subtleties that are involved here that we would need to flesh out further.
So if my neighbor's tree fell on my fence, is my neighbor insurance responsible for fixing that fence, or am I responsible for fixing that fence?
There's not a clear-cut answer to that. Potentially, your neighbor would be, and
Stop. Okay.
This is confusing.
I think there is clear cut. If my tree is in my yard and it falls on Carl's house, Carl's insurance is responsible for it.
That's what
And I think what has brought this up is I have an email from the insurance adjuster. One of these ladies has had the neighbor's tree fall in her garage 3 times, and she's had to have 3 different claims, all submitted while the neighbor just gets by without having to do anything. So if you've talked to an insurance company or get an attorney in here who handles with insurance, he'll tell you, if it falls on your property, you're responsible for it, not the owner of the tree. And I have an email where one of the ladies, the insurance person, says other states have tree ordinances to take care of this.
We'll let
Yeah,
Mr.
just to
Lester.
clarify, I don't think it is that clear cut, Linda, because because you're talking about a couple of different things. You have insurance, and the particular insurance company might have a responsibility to the homeowner. It doesn't mean that if the adjacent property owner to whom the tree belongs, if they have been negligent in how they've handled the tree, they may very well have their own responsibility. Doesn't mean that the individual insurance company isn't going to cover their insured. They probably are, but they may have a separate cause of action against the negligent property owner. So, but it just depends on. It's going to depend. What Gary said is accurate. It's going to depend on a lot of different circumstances.
I
Okay,
respectfully
why don't
disagree.
why don't we
Well,
go ahead and hear the rest of the presentation?
It's not even close.
Why don't we go ahead
That
and,
is.
why don't we hear
And
the-
if I could just respond to Ms. Westergaard, I worked in the litigation department for the city for 8 years. And when I left here in 2014, I became the managing trial attorney for Nationwide Insurance Company here for 4 years after that. I've done litigation for insurance companies, for government. And so these issues, as Jeff mentioned, there's a lot of, you have to determine whether there was negligence involved. If the tree just fell of its own accord, then what you're saying, not of its own accord, but if there was no negligence involved, then it very likely would be the homeowner whose property was damaged, their insurance company likely would pay that claim. But if there was negligence involved where there was liability on the part of the person who owned the tree, then their insurance company may pay that.
But you have
Okay.
to, you have to have your insurance company sue the other insurance company.
Not necessarily,
Or I have to take them to small claims court.
depending on the amount of the damage involved, if it meets the jurisdictional limit for small claims or district court.
For clarity, are you also saying there's confusion about
Right.
who owns the tree?
I'm sorry?
For clarity, are you also saying that there's confusion about who owns the tree?
Those are issues that are involved,
Depending
yes,
with the
and
lot
I have litigated those issues.
And that's based on canopy and trunk and
root structure.
Okay, great.
So is part of this if the tree is alive or dead? I mean,
Yeah, so like when we're talking about liability and negligence, for example, like if you as a property owner have a tree that you know or should know is dead and creating a hazard, and then it does, I mean, and that's why when we're talking about the legal issues that are involved, and we're talking about issues of causation, foreseeability, those types of issues. So that's why there's not a clear-cut answer. Every one of these is going to be fact-specific.
okay, thank you. We'll continue with, we're primarily probably talking about dead trees, right?
Yeah,
Isn't
dead
this
disease, dying, and hazardous.
More likely?
Yep.
I'm not saying other live trees, but in most cases, this is the dead tree issue.
Right.
So then there is negligence involved in a dead tree issue.
Yeah.
Well,
If
Well,
notices and they're aware
yeah.
and all.
You just have to say, I didn't know it was dead.
well,
Anyway, let's go forward.
yeah.
Let's keep going.
So the high cost of abatement civil disputes, which is where like Gary's expertise kind of comes into play here, and everything we just talked about. Obviously, a lot of nuance to talk about, and then funding assistance for how if you guys want to entertain a funding assistance program, what you would want the threshold to be, if you would roll it into an existing funding assistance program, and I've got some follow up on that a bit. So I checked the code for 14 of our Des Moines area communities. 12 of those currently have language in their code that allows them to enforce on, they call it dead, disease, dying, hazardous, nuisance trees. They all call it a different thing. I just want to make sure I'm being clear. They might have the language in their code, but I have not talked to their team to see if they're enforcing on that language.
So they have language in their code where you can go on private property and take down a dead tree. 12 of the 14 communities that you investigated around the metro.
Yeah, so it's in their nuisance code, so they would get the notice, and
Yeah.
if they don't abate, then yeah, the city would have the authority
Okay.
to do that. Yep.
But sometimes it's as easy, like in the case that brought this up, the homeowners had 3 different claims. Her insurance company says, we're not going to cover this anymore. It's your neighbor's fault. Your city doesn't have a tree ordinance in place. She went out, she's concerned about the kids in this home that are out there playing. With the emerald ash borer, the tree doesn't have to be completely dead for those limbs to fall. Those limbs can fall and hurt. It can hurt the property owner, it can hurt the neighbor if those branches fall.
Oh, yeah, yep. So like, while a lot of the ordinances say hazardous or dangerous or nuisance, so dead, disease, dying is the kind of the catchphrase on it. So it doesn't have to be dead as a doornail. It can be
Yeah,
on its way down. Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So that's
And
how they write their ordinances.
Right. Yeah, you're talking a policy discussion, so that's kind of where it falls on you guys. And I got a couple ordinance examples like you requested, Mrs. Westergaard. I'll get to those in a second. I also looked at 14 larger cities around the Midwest, or for other cities around Iowa, not necessarily central Iowa, and 11 of them currently have language within their ordinance. So we are kind of the outlier. And of the ones where I couldn't find it in their ordinance, they very well could have it in a different spot, atypical of most other communities. So they might have something. And none of the 14 communities that I surveyed in central Iowa, the Des Moines area, or the Midwest, none of them make reference of limiting this to rental properties versus owner-occupied, commercial, industrial, whatever. So,
And that's fine with me.
Sure,
I'd
yeah.
rather that it
and so when we were talking about
be
this,
for everybody.
yeah, one of the concerns that we had is if you put you take enforcement on a tree that's on private property, half of it's on the rental property's property line and half of it's on an owner-occupied line. That just, talk about nuance again. It gets kind of sticky. Yeah. So here's some language, and this is per your request again, Mrs. Westergaard. This is all in the slide deck, so there's kind of quite a bit to take in, but this is an example I believe is from Minneapolis. And I have staff representative in there because I'm just not sure what this is going to look like. I'm sure it'll probably be NID that's taking the charge on it, but I don't know if it'll be contract inspections, staff inspections, what have you.
How easy is it to abate a tree nuisance within 14 days?
Very difficult.
That's
That's what I was going to say. Like, that's not, it's more of a warning that in 14 days we're going to take your tree down.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can tell
They'll
you.
have to get an extension.
Right.
Right. I mean, because I'm sure the tree contractors, to get somebody there 14 days is, I mean, to.
But you could have a quote from the companies and a
Right.
and a timeline from them officially. So at least you knew it was being proceeding.
Yeah.
And I'm not even
Yeah, that's good.
concerned about the city abating it. I think many property owners may just not realize that they have an emerald tree, that they have an ash tree and that it's diseased. Now, in most cases, it'll just start dropping branches, still leafed out, but you'll get dropping of large branches. They just need to be made aware. I mean, in this case, I mean, in the case that brought this about, it happens to be a rental, and she doesn't even know how to get a hold of that person. She tried to talk to the tenant, and that didn't go anywhere because of the language barrier. But she said, I'm afraid of these kids that are out here playing, that they're going to get hurt.
Sure.
That's another.
Yep. So to answer your question, 14 days is pretty unreasonable. So that's another policy discussion for you guys. I mean, there would probably need to be some kind of like a safety valve where if it's, wow, this thing is going to fall in the next couple of days with a gust of wind, we've got emergency language. But for your typical dead, disease, dying, give them 30 days, and then that's up to you. 30 days would match our other health and sanitation cases. And even 30 days is kind of pushing it for some of these tree contractors. So
I had a dead tree in my yard last year, and I called, and the quotes I got were for 3-4 months out.
yeah, yep. It's,
But if you have a quote, if you have a bid, saying,
Right.
here, I'm secured this bid, and that should be enough to give you an extension,
Sure.
correct?
Yep.
we
And
would
again, policy discussion, but that would match our other abatement processes. Yeah.
So Dalton, I see that Shane's in the audience here. Shane, let's see. There was an issue last year on 35th Street about a tree over the garage and over the neighbor's garage, and it had already been whacked once, and they were reticent to repair it again because there was more looming on that garage. Would this policy address that issue to the best of your knowledge? A private
Right,
tree,
private.
yeah. Do you recall that home on 35th Street?
Do you want to come up, Shane?
He doesn't recall the tree.
He doesn't recall. So basically,
You don't
dealing with
remember
private
every
property.
tree in Des Moines, Shane?
It's basically dealing with a private property where a tree between two private owners.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, we often get called in. I don't remember that specific example, but what I'm getting from this discussion is that there'll be a dead tree or dead diseased and dying tree, and the city will say, you need to get rid of that, basically. So but at the moment, the big distinction is we do that for our city-owned trees or a private tree that might impact city public safety or infrastructure. So the difference will be could be 100 yards in the back of a property over another person's property, and where I'm understanding Council West of the Guards would like us, where this has come to, is that we can go in and enforce on that and say you need to remove that dead tree. I believe we used to have an ordinance back in the day, and it was Dutch elm disease came about, and from what I understand from an ex-city forester is that it's spent, there was a lot of resources getting spent that were on private to private, and that's what I think back in the day they must have changed so that we don't have one now, was because of the time and resources there.
And to that comment, that might make a difference with insurance companies. If my tree drops on him, and then there's a letter out there that was sent to me saying you have a diseased or dead tree, then that might make a difference with the insurance company.
No, for sure.
Yeah, and I think earlier, sometime last fall, Jonathan and you took a look at what other cities were doing regarding emerald ash borer disease trees on private property. And I think Lincoln, Nebraska had done a program, but they had federal dollars to help.
Yeah, I talked with them, and that was a one-off type of program where they got, I think, 100, 200K, burnt through it pretty quick. As you can imagine, there'd be quite a demand for that. I think at the moment, most people in the city don't know that we don't really do anything when it comes to private, but I mean, that would definitely change. But we did talk to them. I'd be curious to see what the enforcement is like. The cities that I talk to, not so many people, they might have the language in the code. I didn't investigate that. I just talked to city foresters and asked, what do you do? And most of them, besides the Twin Cities and a couple others, actually didn't enforce on private to private. So,
This brings up another question, probably not for you, Shane, but yeah.
Yeah, you can,
How, if we were to abate, would the owner's insurance company be able to cover that? No.
No. I mean, I don't want to say no always, but very likely no.
Versus if they were to deal with it themselves, that it would.
Right.
Or is that only if it falls?
Insurance won't pay for that.
Okay.
So I guess Shane made a comment that, like, if the tree's 100 yards in the back, does he have the resources to be able to? I mean, you're going to have to drive your truck on someone's yard, and then if we damage their yard, are we going to be responsible for that? I mean, how is that going to play out?
All good questions. Yeah. So as far as driving,
I mean, he doesn't have climbers. I wouldn't think that we're going to have people go climb it.
right.
You're in a bucket truck when you're cutting down trees.
So
That's how I've seen them do it.
What I've done in the past is have arborists go out. So I did the dead tree enforcement thing. So I'd had an arborist go out. They would write me a letter certifying, yep, the Norway spruce on the southwest corner of this specific property is dead, diseased, or dying and poses a risk. And then I would take that letter from the arborist and I would send it to the property owner and say, this was an inspection from the ground, no aerial inspection, no climbing. If you'd like to appeal the decision, get another arborist to write me a letter, climb it and write me a letter saying, no, this thing's fine. We're good. Never once did I have that happen.
So do we have the resources to actually go and do this without, I mean, that sounds like I understand what we need to do, but when he said we got to go, it could be 100, 200 yards back into someone's property. I mean, do we have the resources to do that? And I'm looking at Jonathan, I'm looking at Pam, and they're all shaking their head like, no way.
There's not today. And again, there's layers to it. There's the inspections and the notice, but then if there's enforcement required because they don't then act upon it, is a whole nother
Well,
issue
no,
as well.
I can see us going and send a letter, and I mean, the biggest thing is abating it. If they don't do it, are we
Then-
going into someone's yard and, on a day like today with this big bucket truck and putting big ruts in their backyard, and then who's going to fix that?
We would likely contract that, wouldn't we?
That'd be the responsibility of the homeowner to find someone to
But-
remove the tree, not the city.
But if they say,
Not if we-
no,
If
I'm
they
not
don't
doing
do it, though, if they don't do it, what
if
do
they
you
don't do
do?
it?
So that's what the ordinance, or if we put an ordinance in place, we would have to determine all those details.
We wouldn't have to abate it, though. We could just put the ordinance in place, have that letter be there. So if there is a problem with it falling on my neighbor's house, they've been on notice. They know that it's a hazard.
So we're not going to, I'm sorry, so we're not going to go cut it down then. We're just going to tell them it needs cut it down, and then if they don't cut it down, then we're not going to go do it, is what you're saying. Is that what I'm
I think that
hearing?
is an option.
That is an option. I think that,
Suggested language, it says the staff representative may cause the condition to be corrected. So it would be one of those that maybe if it's a particularly unusual circumstance and there's it's next to a school or a daycare and you've got a lot of little children, that may be one that the council or the manager as the chief enforcer of the code wants to act on in that circumstance, but you wouldn't have to. It doesn't say shall.
All right, sounds good. Sorry, Josh.
so do we have, can I just add, before we have more, do we have more presentation, or is this,
Yeah,
is there anything else you wanted to go over?
There's a couple more slides, yeah.
Why don't we see the slides, and then we follow up with any questions at that point?
Sure. On the identifying the defect, probably should address that as a challenge. If we identify an unsafe tree and then don't require that it's abated and it does fall, there is a huge risk for the city there. So,
That's what I thought.
again, that's, if you want to put that in the ordinance, we just notify them of a hazard. I would rather not even touch it in the first place. We're not going to be willing to abate or require abatement.
Yeah, because if we send them a letter and it falls and kills somebody on their house,
Right.
then we're responsible for it.
Right.
Believe me, that's,
But if it's a rental, then we could require that as part of their rental certificate.
yeah, but there's not one, yeah, okay.
Okay, why don't we
Sure.
get through the slides, and then,
So the second ordinance, this one is actually from Minneapolis. The other one was from, I think, West Des Moines. In the Des Moines area, there's really two varieties of what the language looks like. If you check out like the city of Altoona's code, pretty much all of them look like that. I'm not saying Altoona wrote it. They're just alphabetical, so I got them first.
Do they have trees in Altoona?
A couple.
One
One or two.
There?
So really what we need from you guys today is this big picture. There's obviously a ton of nuanced discussion to be had, but is pursuing a dead, disease, dying, hazardous private property tree enforcement program something that the council is willing to?
I would like to know about those 14 some in Midwest cities and Des Moines area, what the enforcement looks like, because you said that you looked at the ordinances, but you didn't talk to them about enforcement. So I'd like to know if they're enforcing or how their enforcement works. That would hopefully clear up some questions that we have.
So
no, go ahead.
So the ordinance reads that they may abate.
May.
May.
If we could talk to their NID and forestry and public works and also legal maybe to figure out how they're managing that ordinance, that would be helpful.
Frequencies.
Yeah, I mean, my take is this is an issue we need to address. I get that the liability issues are a problem. I also think abatement looks a little bit different in this context. I mean, I think we want to try and require the property owner to abate when there are hazards, because if the property owner doesn't, like any other nuisances, it's a problem. In this case, it's actually a problem from a safety perspective in very immediate ways that others are, others are not. It's not just a deterioration of property. If you have if you
Physical
have
harm.
if you have someone walking under that and a large limb falls, I mean, that is scary. So, I mean, we need to figure out a way to address it, but I know there are a lot of difficult issues underneath it too. In terms of,
Yeah, I think the important thing, I think there's consensus, everybody wants something to be looked at or want some process put in place and come back with what you would consider the best ordinance for our city. I believe there's consensus from everyone to do something more than we are doing now.
Yeah, and I don't know if
Okay.
we should just limit it to the rental. I mean,
No, I
I
think that,
think that that's open.
I think it should be everybody.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that affects, the health and well-being of everyone, especially if they're living in a house with their neighbor's tree hanging over it and it's dead. I think that's the most important we need to take a look at.
okay.
I will say, if we're talking enforcement, I don't know that I would entertain something that didn't have some kind of funding component for a below 80% AMI, like some kind of assistance.
Well, that's where like ION or something.
Yeah, I wonder if we could have a program like that, even where, given that like we can put some number of days on there, but it's going to be 4 months out for somebody to even be able to get a quote maybe, or to be able to get abatement. Like if we had some kind of like, we'll work with you to find somebody to take this down or something like that, would be maybe more productive.
Just be aware that these can be incredibly costly.
Yes,
which
exactly.
I understand just escalates the issue that you've brought up, but it would take away from a lot of other programming. So we can bring forward what typical cost would look like, what partner, maybe nonprofit partners are in this area. But it's got a lot of similar feel to it with some of the other policies we've been talking about.
That's exactly why I want to know what enforcement looks like when in places that have this ordinance.
Okay, I think that gives a good start.
Okay. Thank you. It looks like we are at the end of the items we're going to talk about. We will meet again at 4:45 for the regular city council meeting. Thank you.